Welcome back! My name is Baller Scuba. This is Video Games Over Time! We are still in 1985, and we are still in the Bard's Tale. When we last left off, we beat the game. We defeated Mangar, we made it out of Mangar's tower, we got what was most likely unnecessary revenge against a soul sucker, and we potentially saved Scarab Bray. So with the game now finished, it's time to talk about how it holds up today, and the first question that I always ask myself when it comes to that is, did I have fun? And the answer is yes, but it is a bit of a qualified yes, for two main reasons. Number one, I had guides, several guides. I think while I was playing, I had 5 or 6 different tabs open at any given time to keep track of all the different spells, all the maps, all the guides of where to go, what to do, stuff like that. And without those, this would have been much, much worse. And number two, I cheated. I cheated quite a bit in this playthrough. Not only did I use save states, I used frame skip, I guess it's technically called. I sped up the game a lot. And I eventually just hex edited a save state. That's how I ended up doing that. I opened up a save state itself, and I found a guide that told me exactly where to go in the file to edit everybody's experience and stuff like that. And then I edited their experience to save me hours and hours of time. And all of those things were designed to make the game faster, not necessarily easier. Although having the guide does make the game easier, it was really designed to save time. Because without the guide, I would have hit traps all the time. I would have wasted spell points, gotten lost in dungeons as I tried to map it out, things like that. So it would have made it more difficult. And chances are what I would do, and what people were probably doing back in the day, is you would go through a dungeon, mapping it all out as you go, and anytime you encounter something too difficult, you just shut down the computer or shut down the game itself, and then reload and pick back up where you last left off. Because the only way to save in this game is back at the Adventurers Guild. So in order to make it through a dungeon, you would have to map things out, and then go back, save, go back into the dungeon. Now with your notes, you can go where you need to go. So if something bad happens along the way, you can just close the game, reload the save, try again, continue working on your map. So it doesn't necessarily make the game harder. It would just be more workarounds that you would have to do if you don't have a guide. In terms of the save states, kind of the same thing. I just wanted to have luck on my side. I didn't want to have a critical hit kill one of my characters in the middle of a dungeon. Just no thank you. And then frame skip, the speed up that I was doing on those level grinding fights where I fought like 396 berserkers or 99 skeletons or whatever they were. That would have taken a long time. I believe that I could have literally put in all my commands, hit yes, let's do it, and then gone to the bathroom and come back, and it still would have been going. It took a long time to go through those. So with those 3 things that sped up the game, I had fun. And then, of course, the hacking of experience, just to save me hours of time, even with all the other speed ups. That was necessary because I don't always have 10 to 15 hours to level grind between recording sessions because I do this multiple times a week. I don't always have that kind of time. So with those qualifications, I did have fun playing the game, because I was able to speed things up. It's a fun game. There's a lot of enemies for you to fight. Not that we fought a lot of them. There's something of a quest, right? We are told what we need to do, and then we go and do it. It's not super complicated. It's basically go through a dungeon to get the thing, to go to the next dungeon, to get the thing, to go to the next dungeon, that kind of thing. It's just a very straightforward line, but ultimately there is a plot to the game. It's hard not to compare this game to Wizardry and Ultima. And I feel like the game designers knew that. When you tell me I can import a character from Wizardry and Ultima, that means I know you're aware of them and that you've played them, right? You wouldn't import a character from Ultima if you didn't know and like what that character would bring when you imported it from Ultima, right? So them allowing you to do that means they played Ultima, they played Wizardry. Obviously, this game bears a lot of similarities to Wizardry and the Wizardry series. From the difficult start, and I would argue that for any series, at least, this has the most difficult start. And I have to say series because Wizardry 2 and Wizardry 3, you would bring characters forward from previous games, so that is more difficult, but I feel like that doesn't necessarily count. For a new series, start from scratch, right? I'm playing the Bard's Tale. Maybe I haven't played Wizardry or Ultima. It took me about 20 hours of level grinding just to be able to handle the first dungeon. And that basically means it's 20 hours just to start. And once again, that's with save states. That's with frame skip. That's even following guides and things like that. So obviously, that is going to be a hindrance to a lot of people. It's a game that is not easy to pick up and play. It's pick up and let's see if you can figure out what you're doing. So that is difficult. When it comes to the character creation, I am a fan that they allowed us to have pictures of the characters, even if they didn't always match up right. Like our Hobbit Bard really did not look like a Hobbit Bard in the picture. He looked like a warrior, maybe a half-orc, maybe a human, something along those lines. Definitely not a hobbit, definitely not a bard. So I was happy to see them. They even moved, like the graphics are actually quite an improvement for an RPG. But with that said, you once again kind of had to know a lot of the systems already in place in order to play this game. If you had experience with Wizardry, that experience is going to be crucial to you playing the Bard's Tale. Knowing that you can just create characters, pool all your money together, then delete those characters, that's going to be a huge thing to get started in this game. So not everything that you need in order to beat this game, I would say, is explained in the game. Because they expect you to have knowledge of Wizardry and Ultima. And like I said, it's hard not to compare the two, especially Wizardry. It feels like an expansion upon Wizardry here. There are improvements, like I said, having pictures of the classes, much better sprites on the enemies, even though a lot of them were recycled. That tends to happen. You have to save space somehow. But there are some setbacks, I would say, to this game compared to the Wizardry and Ultima series. And one of them is running from battle. Running from battle in this game was far too easy, but it was also how the game balanced itself. It was necessary in order for me to beat the game, right? In order to go through Mangar's Tower, at least all the way through the first time, even when I didn't fight much of anything along the way, if anything. I mean, I had a couple fights, but like any random encounters, I think I ran from all of them. I still used over half my spell points getting through to the end. Like, running in this game is a necessary feature, and I don't like that. I think that the game should be rebalanced so that when I get into a fight with something, I should fight it. Right? These are evil creatures that I'm trying to save the world from. And every time I encounter them, I'm like, well, you're not necessary. I'm just going to run until I get the thing that I need. And it didn't feel good to me to do that. I know I'm kind of bouncing around a bit here, but that was a downside for me. It was just not fun that I had to run from probably 95 to 99% of battles. Anytime that I was trying to make progress, like it was either I'm going to battle specific enemies and fight them and kill them for experience because I'm level grinding right now, or I'm just not going to fight anything at all. those were the two kinds of sessions and runs that I had. And I think that there should be a way to balance that out much better. In terms of the dungeons, the fact that there are multiple dungeons is an improvement over Wizardry. Ultima, of course, has had that for, I believe, since the beginning. But all of Wizardry 1, I believe all of Wizardry 2 and 3 all take place in one dungeon. So this was definitely an improvement because there were 4 dungeons for us to go through. 5 if you want to count the town, but I don't count the town. So 4 dungeons, but like I said, it just felt very linear. It just felt like logistically it functioned the same as like the elevator in Wizardry, where sure, I beat this dungeon to get the thing, so now I can go to this other dungeon. But Wizardry had something similar where you could just start from a certain level down. So it was an improvement that you had to go find them. There are definitely improvements along the way, but Wizardry already had a similar mechanic in the game. In terms of the battle system itself, I think that the battle system was improved upon. I think that the impact of the dice has been mitigated a bit in this game, and hear me out, because I've talked about it a little bit before, but I'm not a huge fan of Dungeons and Dragons battle system, especially at this time, because it's so heavily reliant on the dice that, 2 or 3 bad rolls of the dice could mean the death of your character. At least in this game, it didn't mean it permanently unless you got a full party wipe, but the difference between 1 damage and 16 damage was huge. Sure, it averages out to 8 over time, but in a battle system where 1 or 2 turns are all you get, between 1 and 16 is a huge variance, and I've never been a huge fan of that. And I pick 1 and 16 because that was the damage of the halberd. But this game did a better job of mitigating that, I feel, than Wizardry. And primarily that comes to the spells, because the spells had a smaller range, right? If you remember in Wizardry 1, the ultimate, I won't spoil too much about it, but the ultimate spell in Wizardry 1 was called Tilt-A-Weight, if memory serves me correctly, and I think it did 10 to 100 damage. And I don't want to spoil too much about it, but it would hit 10 to 100 damage on every enemy that you faced, similar to Mangar's Mind Blade in the Bard's Tale, but here it was, I think, 10 to 40. It was a much smaller range, and so it didn't feel like I was just rolling the dice, because in Wizardry, the fight... I'll spoil a little bit. There was a very difficult fight in Wizardry where I could cast Tilt-A-Weight and the enemy could cast Tilt-A-Weight, and whoever hit it first and had the better roll of the dice, they essentially won the battle. At least that's how it felt. And in this game, it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel like, oh no, I'm facing something that can kill me in one shot, or I can kill it in one shot. It all depends on some dice rolls here. But with that said, there were more improvements that I felt could be made. I wish that stats didn't cap at 18, especially dexterity, because, about halfway through the game, everybody just has 18 dexterity, so it just felt like a roll of the dice again to see who went first. And going first often means a lot, but we had ways of dealing with that, which is why this felt like an improvement. But ultimately, I would like different caps for different classes, so that my monk could still be the fastest thing out there, right? My monk should have always gone first. He should have always been the fastest, at least in my mind. He should have been faster than the mages and the bard and most of the enemies. But it didn't work out that way because everybody had 18 dexterity, so everybody could go right now. I'll also say that the bard, for being named the Bard's Tale, I wanted that bard to be way more useful than he was. The bard songs, like, I rarely used it in battle towards the end. Like, I was using it at the beginning to try to, have the odds in my favor. But as time went on, it just felt like it was not super useful to have a bard. Like, I could easily have a second monk and it would have probably been better for me. But that's kind of end game stuff. At the beginning, he was useful, but I don't know. In terms of the classes, I was also a huge fan of the class changes. The fact that I was able and encouraged, basically, especially for my mage characters, to experiment around with, okay, you've got the max level of this starting one, the conjurer or the magician. You have everything that you need from that class. Let's move you over to another class. And that I would have loved to see that expanded so that it was also useful for the front line. As far as I know, because I didn't test it, but as far as I know, moving like Thyra from paladin to warrior would have just basically ruined Thyra until I got stats back, right? Because how often you hit, how many hits that you get per turn is dependent on your level, so you don't really want to get rid of that level. But the only benefit to getting levels as a mage class was access to spells, so it was real easy to switch them around. So I was a big fan of the class changes, and I actually want more of it. I would love to be able to move everybody around between classes and build a stronger and stronger party, also while upping their stats so that everybody gets different stats at the end. But yeah, overall, I feel like this game is an improvement, and therefore I did have fun. So there are issues that we kind of talked about, and I haven't even talked about one of the biggest ones for me, which is the sound. The sound is both an improvement and a sticking point for me. The sound, of course, it having a jingle that it will play because you have a bard in your party is a huge deal. With that said, the song that it kept playing was really grating on me. And I'm sure it was more grating on me than it is for several other people. But for me, it was so much nicer to just turn it off and move on. Just mute it and move on. And if I feel the need to mute your music, it's not going to be particularly good. So I don't think that particularly aged well, but you know, they are experimenting with music in a game, in an Apple II game. So that could, that could be seen as a positive, but for me, it was both a positive and a negative. Of course, I don't have a lot of time in the Commodore 64 version of the game, which is also an original version, and the Commodore 64 is more powerful than the Apple II, so maybe it was better music over there, but for me, in the Apple II version, it was rough to listen to it. I was also a big fan of the level grinding spots. We kind of talked about that a little bit, that the game was really slow there, but the fact that those exist was definitely something that they kept in mind. And I applaud them for actually noting that, hey, if you know what you're doing, you still need the levels. Here's a spot where you can get them quickly and just kill all of these enemies with an area of effect spell, an AoE spell. Just use your Dragon Breath or your War Strike or the Shock Sphere, what have you, and kill them all in one spell and then get all your stuff and move on. So that was something that I was a fan of, but ultimately the level grinding is kind of the biggest thing that's going to prevent me from recommending this game to a wide variety of people. Even for dedicated RPG fans, even for fans of Wizardry and Ultima, this game is going to be time consuming. This game eats at a lot of time if you don't just cheat to start. And so I would recommend cheating to start, cheating throughout. Just try to keep it balanced well enough. I think I ended up at level 22 and the recommendation was level 21. So it's not like I went way overboard, even though sometimes it felt like it. I will also say that the final fight was a little underwhelming. Mangar at least took multiple hits. We can't always say that in an RPG, but it didn't necessarily feel like the biggest, baddest fight out there. I didn't even use the Spectre Snare because I killed the Vampire Lords too quickly. That was supposed to bind them to our party so that they wouldn't attack me, but I killed them too fast. And that happens sometimes in these games because there's just so many variables and things can swing so much either way. So ultimately, the game is an improvement. It does progress things further. Once again, it's hard not to compare it to Wizardry and Ultima. Ultimately, I would say that the Bard's Tale is better than the Wizardry series, but not as good as Ultima 3 or 4. Ultima 1 or 2, I think you can make a case. It's about the same for me, probably, but Ultima 3 and 4 I felt were better. And I hate doing comparisons like that, but like I said, the game invited it by saying, hey, if you liked Ultima, play us too. It's a different system, so it's harder to compare it to Ultima, but ultimately it's difficult to recommend this one. It's important, and I'm glad we played it, but unless you are a fan of level grinding for dozens of hours, and if you want to do it the way that it was supposed to be done in 1985 with reloading your save every time something bad happens, you'll easily spend a couple hundred hours level grinding in this game, only for about 10 to 15 hours of actual progression. So just know that going in. If that does not sound fun to you, then I wouldn't recommend this game. And that's my modern take on The Bard's Tale. When the game was released, The Bard's Tale would prove to be popular. It would become one of the best-selling computer RPGs of the 1980s, selling over 400,000 copies. By 1993, the game sold over 1 million copies. Critics at the time were also positive about the game. In particular, the depth, graphics, and addictiveness of the game were praised. As time has gone on, The Bard's Tale has retained its positive reputation. The game will occasionally find itself on lists of best computer RPGs and best video games of all time. The Bard's Tale would see ports, a remaster, sequels, and a novel series. We will keep an eye on some of these as we continue. As for Interplay Productions, the success of The Bard's Tale would propel the company to new heights in the computer video game industry. We will hear from Interplay again. As for all the individual creators behind the game, they would all continue to work in the video game industry, and we will hear from all of them again in the future as well. That will do it for the story of The Bard's Tale for now. My name is Baller Scuba. This has been Video Games Over Time. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in our next video when we go over the last honorable mentions of 1985.